Billionaire stunned to see his black pregnant ex-wife working at a restaurant. What happens next? What if the biggest mistake of your life walked back into your world when you least expected it? James Patterson adjusted his designer tie as he stepped into Romano's, the quaint family restaurant his assistant had recommended for a quiet business lunch. The scent of garlic and fresh herbs filled the air, reminding him of simpler times before wealth had complicated everything. He'd chosen this place specifically to avoid the usual celebrity spotting that came with upscale dining. As he waited to be seated, a familiar laugh drifted from across the dining room, soft, musical, achingly familiar. His heart stopped. There, balancing plates with graceful efficiency despite her obviously pregnant condition, stood Jasmine. The woman he'd lost 5 years ago when pride and ambition had mattered more than love. She hadn't noticed him yet, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face glowing with that radiant beauty that had first captured his heart in college. "Where are you watching from tonight?" James remained frozen by the hostess station, memories flooding back like a broken dam. 5 years ago, Jasmine had been his everything, his college sweetheart, his anchor in a world that demanded ruthless ambition. They'd met in economics class at Stanford, where her brilliant mind and kind heart had drawn him in completely. She'd supported his dreams of building a tech empire, working 2 jobs to help pay for their modest apartment while he coded late into the night. But success had changed him, made him hungry for more prestige, more recognition. When his company's valuation hit $1 billion, the pressure from investors and society circles had grown unbearable. They wanted him to project a certain image, attend certain galas, and marry someone from their world. The hostess approached with a polite smile. "Table for 1, sir?" James nodded absently, still watching Jasmine move gracefully between tables. She wore the restaurant's standard black uniform, but even in simple clothing, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had always set her apart. A middle-aged couple at table 6 was giving her trouble about their order, their voices growing louder and more demanding. James watched his ex-wife handle their complaints with patient professionalism, never losing her composure even as they became increasingly unreasonable. "Right this way," the hostess said, leading him toward a corner booth. As they walked, James caught fragments of Jasmine's conversation with an elderly woman sitting alone. "How's your grandson doing in school, Mrs. Chen?" Jasmine asked warmly, refilling the woman's coffee cup. "I remember you mentioned his science project last week." The genuine care in her voice was unmistakable. She'd always possessed this gift, the ability to remember details about people's lives, to make everyone feel seen and valued. James slid into his booth, positioning himself where he could observe without being noticed. A younger server approached to take his order, but James barely registered the words. His attention remained fixed on Jasmine, noting how she moved more carefully now, one hand occasionally resting on her rounded belly. Questions tumbled through his mind. How far along was she? Who was the father? Was she married? The thought of another man in her life sent an unexpected stab of pain through his chest. Their breakup had been brutal in its civility. No screaming matches, no thrown objects, just quiet disappointment and the gradual erosion of everything they'd built together. "You've become someone I don't recognize," she'd said on their last night together, her eyes filled with tears she was too proud to shed. The James the first fell in love with cared about people more than profit margins. He'd been too arrogant then to see her truth, convinced that she simply didn't understand the sacrifices required for real success. Now, watching her work with such grace despite her condition, he felt the full weight of what he'd thrown away. The restaurant buzzed with the comfortable energy of a neighborhood gathering place, so different from the sterile luxury of his usual haunts. Jasmine approached a table of construction workers, joking easily with them as she took their order. They clearly adored her, their rough faces softening with genuine affection. This was her world now, real, honest, filled with authentic connections he'd forgotten how to make. James ordered absently when his server returned, choosing the first item on the menu without reading it. His focus remained entirely on Jasmine, who seemed to light up every corner of the restaurant with her presence. She helped an elderly man navigate the menu, patiently explaining ingredients for his dietary restrictions. She celebrated with a young couple announcing their engagement, bringing them a complimentary dessert with genuine joy. Every interaction revealed the warmth and compassion that had made him fall in love with her 15 years ago. But as the lunch rush intensified, James noticed the strain beginning to show. Jasmine moved more slowly, pausing occasionally to steady herself against tables. The demanding couple from earlier had escalated their complaints, now insisting their food was cold despite having taken 20 minutes to taste it. The woman's shrill voice cut through the restaurant's pleasant atmosphere. "This service is absolutely unacceptable. We want to speak to the manager immediately." Jasmine approached their table with admirable composure. "I apologize for any inconvenience. Let me get the kitchen to prepare fresh meals for you right away." But the woman wasn't finished. She stood up, her voice growing louder and more vindictive. "You people need to learn proper service standards. This is exactly why nice restaurants don't hire." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Jasmine's pregnancy with obvious disdain. "Why don't they hire girls in your condition?" The restaurant fell silent. James felt his hands clench into fists as he watched color drain from Jasmine's face. The comment had struck deep, probably triggering insecurities about working while pregnant, about providing for her child. But instead of retreating, Jasmine straightened her shoulders. "Ma'am, I understand you're frustrated with your meal. Would you like me to ask the manager to comp your entire order?" The woman's husband finally intervened, clearly embarrassed by his wife's behavior. "That's enough, Helen. Let's just go." But Helen wasn't finished. "I want to speak to whoever hired this girl. She obviously can't handle the job." As she gathered her purse, she deliberately knocked over her water glass, sending liquid cascading across the table and onto Jasmine's uniform. The accident, though it clearly wasn't accidental, was too much. Jasmine swayed slightly, her pregnancy and the stress of the confrontation finally overwhelming her composure. James was on his feet before conscious thought could stop him, moving swiftly toward her table. But Jasmine steadied herself, refusing to give the cruel woman the satisfaction of seeing her break down. An older gentleman at a nearby table stood up, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Ma'am, I've been coming to this restaurant for 30 years, and Jasmine here is the finest server I've ever encountered. Your behavior is disgraceful." Other customers began murmuring in agreement, creating a protective wall of support around Jasmine. The construction workers from her earlier table rose as one unit, their presence silently but effectively encouraging the difficult couple to leave. As Helen and her husband hurried toward the exit, Jasmine began cleaning up the spilled water with shaking hands. "If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." The simple kindness of strangers defending her had clearly moved her to tears, though she tried to hide them. James stood frozen between his booth and her table, watching the woman he'd once loved handle dignity and cruelty with equal grace. But now she'd seen him too, her eyes widening in shock as recognition dawned. The water glass slipped from Jasmine's trembling fingers, shattering against the floor with a sharp crack that seemed to echo her own emotional state. For a moment, time suspended itself as their eyes locked across the crowded restaurant. James saw everything in her face: surprise, pain, vulnerability, and something that looked heartbreakingly like hope before pride quickly masked it. She knelt carefully to gather the glass fragments, her movements deliberately slow to accommodate her pregnancy. Without thinking, James moved toward her, dropping to help collect the broken pieces. "Don't," he said softly as she reached for a particularly sharp shard. "You'll cut yourself." Their hands nearly touched as they worked, the familiar electricity of their connection still present after all these years. Other customers had returned to their conversations, but James felt as though they existed in a bubble of shared history and unspoken words. "What are you doing here?" Jasmine's voice was barely above a whisper, so different from the confident woman who'd handled the difficult customers moments before. She looked exhausted, her earlier composure cracking under the weight of seeing him again. "I thought you only ate at places that required reservations and valet parking." The comment stung because it was true. "I wanted somewhere quiet," he admitted, accepting a dustpan from another server who'd appeared to help. "I had no idea you worked here." They stood together, awkwardness filling the space between them. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her pregnancy giving her an ethereal glow that made his chest ache with loss and regret. "Congratulations," he said, gesturing toward her belly. The word felt hollow, insufficient for the complexity of emotions coursing through him. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, a gesture so instinctively maternal it nearly broke his heart. "Thank you," she replied stiffly. "I should get back to work." But before she could escape, her manager emerged from the kitchen, a kind-faced older man named Frank who'd clearly witnessed the earlier confrontation. "Jazzy, take your break. You've had enough stress for one day." He turned to James with the protective instincts of someone who cared about his employees. "And you are?" "An old friend," Jasmine said quickly, saving James from having to explain. "It's fine, Frank." "Really?" But Frank wasn't convinced, his experienced eyes noting her shaken state. "Break. Now. 15 minutes. It wasn't a suggestion." Jasmine looked at James with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Would you like to sit outside? There's a small patio." He nodded, following her through the restaurant's back door to a modest garden area with a few tables and chairs. The fresh air seemed to help her relax slightly, though tension still radiated from her posture. They sat in silence for several moments before Jasmine spoke. "How did you find me?" Her question carried layers of meaning. Was he checking up on her? Had he been looking for her? Was this truly a coincidence? "I didn't," he answered honestly. "My assistant recommended this place. I had no idea you worked here. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." The silence stretched between them, filled with 5 years of unspoken words and unanswered questions. James studied her profile, noting new lines around her eyes that suggested both laughter and worry. "How long have you been working here?" he asked gently. 2 years, Jasmine replied, her voice steady but guarded. "After I finished my master's degree in social work, I needed flexible hours for fieldwork. Frank has been incredibly understanding." She paused, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. "Especially now." James felt the weight of everything left unsaid between them. "Jasmine, he began, but she held up her hand, stopping him. "Don't," she said softly. "Please don't apologize or try to explain what happened 5 years ago. I've made peace with it. We both made choices." Her words were gentle but firm, establishing boundaries he needed to respect. "I'm curious, though. What brings someone like you to a neighborhood place like Romano's?" The question forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his life since their breakup. "Honestly, I'm tired of restaurants where everyone knows my net worth before they know my name. I wanted to eat somewhere that felt real." He gestured around the modest patio. "This feels real." "It is real," she agreed. "The people here become like family." Mrs. Chen lost her husband last month, and the whole restaurant rallied around her. Tony, one of the construction workers, brings his kids in every Friday for dinner because it's the one night his ex-wife lets him have them. Frank helped my neighbor's teenage son get his first job here when he was headed down a bad path. She spoke with genuine affection, painting a picture of a community James hadn't experienced in years. "And the baby?" he asked quietly, the question he'd been avoiding finally surfacing. Jasmine's face softened, transformation evident in her expression. "Due in 3 months. It's a girl." She paused, studying his face. "Her father isn't in the picture. His choice, not mine." The revelation hit James harder than expected. She was facing single motherhood, working on her feet through pregnancy, building a life of genuine connections, while he'd spent 5 years accumulating wealth but losing touch with anything meaningful. "Are you happy?" he asked, the question emerging before he could stop it. Jasmine considered carefully before answering. "I'm content. I love my work with the families I counsel. I love this job, the people here. I'm excited about becoming a mother." She met his gaze directly. "I learned that happiness doesn't always look like what we think it should." Her words carried gentle wisdom that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her intelligence and insight. As they talked, James found himself relaxing for the first time in months. No business pressures, no social expectations, just honest conversation with someone who'd known him before success had complicated everything. "I should go back in," Jasmine said eventually, starting to rise from her chair. But she moved too quickly, and a wave of dizziness clearly overwhelmed her. James was immediately at her side, steadying her with gentle hands. "Easy," he murmured, the protective instincts she'd always inspired in him surfacing instantly. "I'm fine," she insisted, but she leaned into his support for a moment longer than necessary. "Just tired. Pregnancy and lunch rush don't always mix well." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As they stood close together, James caught the familiar scent of her perfume. Light, floral, achingly familiar. "Jasmine," he said softly, "would you let me drive you home after your shift ends?" Jasmine studied his face for a long moment, weighing the offer and its implications. "Why?" she asked simply. "What do you want from me, James?" The directness of her question demanded equal honesty in return. "I don't know," he admitted, running his hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their college days when he'd wrestle with difficult problems. "I just know that seeing you again, seeing how you've built this beautiful life, makes me realize how empty mine has become. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just want to make sure you get home safely." After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "My shift ends at 4. She returned to work, and James found himself unable to leave. Instead, he ordered coffee and watched her finish her afternoon, marveling at her grace and competence. She moved through the restaurant like a conductor leading an orchestra, anticipating needs, solving problems, and creating harmony wherever she went. When 4 o'clock arrived, James was waiting by the door. Frank approached him while Jasmine gathered her things. "She's special," the older man said quietly. "Customers ask for her specifically. She remembers everyone's stories, their troubles, their celebrations. If you hurt her again, you'll have to answer to all of us." "I understand," James replied, touched by the protective love surrounding her. "I have no intention of hurting her." During the drive to her modest apartment, they talked easily about safer topics. Her studies, her work with struggling families, his gradual realization that wealth without purpose felt hollow. When he pulled up to her building, she turned to face him. "Thank you for today," she said. "For helping with the glass, for listening, for the ride home. It was good to see you again." She paused at the car door. "James, I want you to know that I forgive you. For everything that happened between us. We were young, and you were under enormous pressure. I understand that now." Her forgiveness, freely given without conditions or demands, overwhelmed him completely. "I don't deserve it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," she replied gently. "It's about choosing peace over pain. I chose peace a long time ago." As he watched her walk toward her apartment, James realized that seeing Jasmine again hadn't reopened old wounds, it had shown him what healing looked like. She'd built a life of meaning and connection, choosing service over status, community over competition. She was preparing to welcome a child with courage and joy, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. Driving away, James made his own choice. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel my dinner meetings this week. I want to research family counseling programs in the city, specifically, ones that need funding. And find out what Romano's restaurant might need in terms of employee benefits or facility improvements." For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins. Jasmine had shown him that true success wasn't measured in dollars but in the lives you touched, the kindness you shared, and the peace you created along the way. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the beautiful connections that make life truly meaningful.